You're doing just fine. And then you see what someone else has accomplished. A promotion, a house, a life that looks from the outside exactly like what you thought you wanted. And something shifts. Not dramatically, just quietly. What felt sufficient a moment ago suddenly feels like less. You didn't choose to feel that way. It just happened. We compare almost constantly. Income, appearance, relationships, career trajectory. How far along we are relative to where we think we should be. And the measuring never quite stops. Even when we know it's not useful. Even when we know the comparison isn't fair. Even when we know that what we're seeing is someone's highlight reel and not their reality. We compare anyway. Then we feel worse for having done it. Social comparison is not a modern problem. It's an ancient instinct. For most of human history, we lived in small groups, tribes of maybe 30 to 150 people. In that environment, knowing where you stood relative to others was genuinely important. Who had more resources? Who held more status? Who was more capable? These were not vanity metrics. They were survival information. The brain that paid attention to social standing was the brain that knew when alliances were shifting, when resources were being redistributed unequally, when its position in the group was at risk. Comparison kept our ancestors alive. Psychologist Leon Festinger described this in 1954 as social comparison theory. We evaluate our own abilities, achievements, and worth by measuring them against others. Not because we're insecure, but because comparison is one of the primary tools the brain uses to understand where it stands. In the absence of objective standards, other people become the benchmark. Am I doing well? Compared to whom? The brain needs a reference point, and other people are the most available reference points we have. For most of human history, your comparison pool was small. 30 people, maybe 150. People you knew personally. People whose full lives you could see, not just their best moments. Now the comparison pool is effectively unlimited. Millions of people, carefully curated versions of their lives. Highlights without context. Achievements without struggle. The brain is running ancient software on a scale that it was never designed for. And the result is a comparison loop that has no natural endpoint. There's always someone doing more, having more, appearing to be more. Not all comparison is harmful. Psychologists distinguish between two types of social comparison. Upward comparison, measuring yourself against people who appear to be doing better, and downward comparison, measuring yourself against people who appear to be doing worse. Upward comparison, when used as motivation rather than judgment, can drive genuine worth. Seeing what is possible can clarify what you want. The problem is not comparison itself. The problem is using comparison as a measure of worth rather than a source of direction. Here's something the comparing mind almost always gets wrong. It treats different lives as if they're running the same race. As if there's one finish line that everyone is trying to reach. One definition of success that applies equally to everyone. But lives are not comparable in any meaningful way. Different starting points, different resources, different values, different definitions of a life well lived. When you compare your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 10, you're not gathering information. You're generating noise. There's one form of comparison that consistently produces clarity rather than suffering. comparing yourself to who you were before, not to someone else's present, to your own past. This comparison has something that social comparison never can: accurate context. You know where you started. You know what it cost you. You know what changed and why. No one else's timeline can give you that information. Underneath most comparison is a question the mind is trying to answer. Am I okay? Am I doing enough? Am I moving in the right direction? These are legitimate questions, but other people's lives cannot answer them because the answers are not out there. They're internal. They depend on what you value, what you're building toward. What kind of life feels true to you, not impressive to others? Comparison looks outward for an answer that can only be found inward. You will compare yourself to others. The brain will see that. But comparison is a tool, not a verdict. It can tell you what you admire, what you want, what direction feels worth moving toward. What it cannot tell you is whether you are enough. That question has a different answer, and it has nothing to do with what anyone else is doing.